Well, a little inspiration before I get into things. There are a number of things that I would like to talk about, but one of them is to thank Mr. Bill Abrams, or Mr. Bill Abram, who put up on YouTube Canadian banksters fraud exposed. And if you have a chance to look that up, I highly recommend it. And what this brought me back, actually it never left me, but it brought me back to 1972 when things were getting a little shaky in Canada. The route for liberation had opened up, and many young people knew it after the 60s, and some of us older ones felt obliged to try and do something about it, which in many cases, of course, confronted some really serious opposition, like the big money. And many of us, like myself, of course, at that point had a belief that there was such a thing in institutions, some institutions, and that those institutions could be very easily polluted by, well, people lacking probity, lacking conscience, engaging in those institutions and taking them over like psychos, really, entering, at some lower level as an office boy or something, working their way up to the banker in chief. And his sole purpose has always been, since the day he arrived, was to ensure that his department was profitable. In other words, it was generating more evidence of wealth than anything else. Profit, in other words, profit motivated and so on. And of course, that relies on the principles of usury. And if you don't believe in that, well, you can hardly be involved in business. And of course, that slides you down the hill. People say, well, it's just business, as though our consciences had to be destroyed. And when you consider how corrupting an influence the money system is, especially in Canada, since Mr. Trudeau decided, and of course followed by happily by the Conservatives, to not go through the proper protocol to get the money. And in those days, I'm fairly certain it was necessary for the Governor General to sign off on a warrant. And that was only for extraordinary use when Parliament was in session, or not in session, interregnum, or when Parliament was not functioning. And in fact, the House had not been called back with a minority government now for Mr. Trudeau. And so he had a protocol to follow, and somewhere in there, the machinations of his then finance minister or auditor general, I can always remember which, Maxwell Henderson, who apparently was deeply involved in the financing of the Brofmans, the Seagrams, the Shenleys, and all the alcohol organized criminals that had always been inherently involved in that. And of course, including not only John Kennedy's father, but Mr. Trudeau's father, I think, was also engaged. Sometimes the cover for the operation would be selling cars or something. There were always sort of shady operations that were tolerated in this very tolerant country, where a certain amount of shenanigans has been around. I mean, they were messing around with odometers on motor cars when I first arrived in Vancouver. And there was a general effort here, though, to sustain a pretty high level of integrity. Unfortunately, that desire for integrity was around certain very deeply and corrupting influences that were everywhere, but certainly were in Vancouver. Sexism, racism, dirty tricks, blue meanness, rip-offs, lies, cheating, and so on and so on and so on. Well, I've been taught to, tell the truth, not lie, not cheat, and so on, and all of that. And I'd done all of those things in and around my family. I stole money from my money jar, and I suppose it was mine, but I don't think my mother would have approved it had she known I was taking it stealthily to buy model airplane glue, actually, to make model airplanes. I didn't know it was an addictive substance when I was a little boy. And I'm communicating with Neptune or whatever else I'm doing in addition. But I was in a cupboard at the top of the stairs in a small suburban house, and whether that opened my thinking in some way or destroyed my thinking, but I previously had a bad concussion, and it was about that time that really I started into the model airplane business. Well, no, I'd been into it since 6 or 7, but seriously, in a suburban cupboard. So, somewhere in there, anyway, I guess the influence of a Reverend Garrard, I believe his name was, at St. John's Low Anglican Church in Wimborne, Dorset, had influenced me to believe that being a good Christian, being kind and fair and loving my neighbors and myself and taking care of my family and all those good things were necessary, and my failures of lying, cheating, stealing, well, I was never really ever called out. But I realized that you don't have to be called out to have a conscience, to be able to distinguish what is right and wrong. And such a talker I am, and such a storyteller, I really am stuck with very few stories, but they're all largely true. Largely true, I say, because in the course of time, sometimes details come back to you which appear to embellish the original story, but were in fact a part of the story because the story was quite extraordinary. And it's a very odd story. I was chosen, actually, one of those chosen people, for a very narrow target. And judging by what is growing out of the top of my head in this picture, there. Okay. Is it growing at there we go. It's not growing at the top of my head, but my eye level's changed. Anyway, well, there you go. So much for background. Okay, my story. Yeah. And I had a mentor, and my dad had a mentor, and people in service got mentors. They weren't aristocrats, but they were often serving people from below stairs, as they used to call it, commoners, people who valued their commonism, not their communism, because they didn't live in communes, although in effect aristocratic estates were a commune of a style and a fashion. And of course they went through a lot of changes. Well, anyway, there was a certain point where uh, let's place this in a medieval period,